December 26, 1996. 5:52 a.m. A frantic 911 call shatters the silence of a quiet Boulder, Colorado neighborhood. A mother's voice, trembling with panic, reports her 6-year-old daughter missing. A ransom note, nearly 3 pages long, lies on the kitchen stairs. But within 8 hours, the truth would prove far more horrifying than any kidnapping. The child's body would be found in the basement of her own home, and nearly 3 decades later, her father has finally broken his silence about what really happened that Christmas night. This is the JonBenét Ramsey case, a mystery that has captivated the world for 28 years. A case that destroyed a family, divided a nation, and left more questions than answers. John Ramsey, now 80 years old, has spent nearly 3 decades under the shadow of suspicion, accused by millions of being involved in his own daughter's death. But in his latest interview, he revealed details that have never been made public before, details that could finally change everything we thought we knew about that tragic Christmas night. Before we unlock the vault on this case, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at True Crime Vault, we dive deep into the investigations that deserve to be remembered. We examine the evidence, analyze the testimonies, and search for truth in the cases that refuse to be forgotten. New in-depth documentaries every week. If you're already invested in this case, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think really happened that night. Now, let's examine what John Ramsey finally admitted after 28 years of silence. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia. She was the youngest child of John and Patsy Ramsey, joining her older brother Burke, who was 9 years old at the time of her death. The Ramseys appeared to be the picture-perfect American family. John Ramsey was a successful businessman, the president of Access Graphics, a computer services company that had recently grossed over $1 billion in annual revenue. Patsy Ramsey, a former Miss West Virginia, had devoted herself to raising their children in their upscale Boulder home, valued at over $700,000 in 1996. JonBenét had become a fixture in the child beauty pageant circuit. By age 6, she had won numerous titles, including Little Miss Colorado, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, and America's Royale Tiny Miss. Photos and videos of JonBenét in full makeup, elaborate costumes, and styled hair became central to the media coverage that would follow her death. Some saw a talented, confident child performing on stage with poise beyond her years. Others saw a little girl forced into an adult world far too soon, dressed and made up in ways that made many viewers uncomfortable. The pageant participation would later become a focal point of investigation and speculation. Had someone at these events become obsessed with JonBenét? Had the public nature of her appearances made her a target? These questions would haunt investigators and the family for years to come. Christmas Day, 1996, seemed entirely ordinary for the Ramsey family. They started the morning at home, exchanging gifts around the Christmas tree. JonBenét received a bike and other presents. The family spent time together, enjoying what appeared to be a normal, happy holiday. In the afternoon, they attended a holiday party at the home of Fleet and Priscilla White, close friends of the family who lived nearby in Boulder. According to multiple witnesses at the party, JonBenét appeared happy and healthy. She played with other children. She ate some crab from the buffet, which her mother Patsy later mentioned in interviews. She showed no signs of distress or illness. She was, by all accounts, a normal 6-year-old girl enjoying Christmas with friends and family. The Ramseys returned home around 9:30 p.m. Patsy later stated that JonBenét had fallen asleep in the car during the short drive home. John Ramsey carried her inside and up to her bedroom. Patsy said she put JonBenét to bed still wearing the clothes she'd worn to the party, a red turtleneck sweater and black velvet pants, too tired for the usual bedtime routine of changing into pajamas and brushing teeth. Burke was sent to bed in his own room. John Ramsey reported going to bed around 10 p.m. Patsy said she stayed up a bit longer, preparing for an early morning trip the family had planned to fly to their vacation home in Charlevoix, Michigan. They were supposed to leave Boulder at 7 a.m. on December 26th. The house settled into silence. All the lights were turned off. The doors were locked, or so the family believed. What happened in the next 7 hours remains one of the most debated mysteries in American crime history. At 5:52 a.m. on December 26th, Patsy Ramsey called 911. The call, which has been analyzed thousands of times by experts and armchair detectives alike, lasted 5 minutes and 51 seconds. Patsy's voice on the recording sounds panicked and breathless. She reported finding a ransom note on the spiral staircase leading from the second floor to the kitchen. The note, written on paper from a pad found inside the Ramsey home, demanded $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return. That specific amount was nearly identical to John Ramsey's recent bonus from Access Graphics. The 911 operator, Kim Archuleta, tried to keep Patsy calm and get essential information. Patsy said she had checked JonBenét's room and found her daughter missing. The operator instructed Patsy not to touch anything and to wait for police. The call ended with Patsy seemingly hanging up the phone. But the recording continued for a few more seconds, and what was captured in those seconds would become one of the most controversial pieces of evidence in the entire case. The ransom note itself became one of the most scrutinized pieces of evidence in criminal history. At 2.5 pages, it was unusually long for a ransom demand. Most kidnapping notes are brief and to the point, just essential information about the demand and how to make the exchange. This note rambled. It threatened. It contained bizarre movie references that experts later identified as coming from films like Ransom, Dirty Harry, and Speed. The note began, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter." It went on to demand exactly $118,000 in cash, in hundreds, 20s, and 10s, in a brown paper bag. It warned John not to contact police, the FBI, or anyone else, or JonBenét would be beheaded. It said they would call between 8 and 10 a.m. on December 26th with instructions for delivering the money. It was signed SBTC, initials that have never been definitively explained. The note was written with a black Sharpie marker, also from inside the Ramsey home. The notepad it was written on was found in the house. Investigators discovered that the writer had actually started the note on one page, apparently made a mistake or didn't like how it looked, then tore that page out and started fresh. Both the practice note and the final note were written while the author was inside the Ramsey home. After writing the note, the pad and pen were both returned to their original locations in the kitchen. This suggested someone who was comfortable in the house and not in a hurry to leave. The handwriting analysis would become a major focus of the investigation. Experts were brought in from around the country to compare the note to writing samples from both John and Patsy Ramsey. John was ruled out as the author almost immediately. His handwriting bore no significant similarities to the note. Patsy's handwriting showed some similarities to the note, but experts disagreed on whether she had actually written it. Some said the evidence was inconclusive. Others said she couldn't be eliminated as the author. No expert definitively stated that Patsy Ramsey wrote the ransom note, but the ambiguity was enough to fuel suspicion. Boulder police officer Rick French arrived at the Ramsey home at 5:59 a.m., just 7 minutes after the initial call. He was the first officer on scene, responding to what was at that point a reported kidnapping. Within the hour, the house was filled with people. Detective Linda Arndt arrived and took command of the scene. Victim advocates from the Boulder Police Department came to support the family. Friends of the Ramseys, including Fleet and John Fernie, gathered to wait for the ransom call that the note promised would come between 8 and 10 a.m. The house, which should have been treated as a crime scene from the moment police arrived, became contaminated with multiple people walking through rooms, touching surfaces, and unknowingly destroying potential evidence. This was one of the first critical failures in the investigation. While it's understandable that responding officers believed they were dealing with a kidnapping rather than a murder, basic crime scene protocols were not followed. People were allowed to move freely through the house. Items were touched and moved. The scene was not preserved. Officer French did perform an initial search of the house, including the basement. At approximately 6:15 a.m., he went downstairs and checked several rooms. He came to the wine cellar, a small room at the far end of the basement. The door was closed. French opened it, looked inside, saw that it was dark, and moved on without entering or turning on the light. Had he stepped inside or searched more thoroughly, he would have found JonBenét's body at that moment, more than 6 hours before it was actually discovered. This failure would haunt French for the rest of his career. The ransom call never came. As the promised time window of 8 to 10 a.m. passed, tension filled the home. Detective Arndt, who would later testify about the events of that day, found herself in an increasingly difficult situation. She was alone at the house with multiple civilians, including the family and their friends. Other officers and detectives had left to follow up on leads or were working other aspects of the investigation. Arndt felt she was losing control of the scene. At approximately 1 p.m., in a decision that would change everything, Detective Arndt suggested that John Ramsey and Fleet White search the house again, top to bottom, to see if they noticed anything unusual or out of place. She wanted them occupied and thought perhaps they might notice something that officers had missed. She told them to start in the basement and work their way up. John Ramsey and Fleet White headed downstairs. They checked the train room where Burke played with his model trains. They checked the boiler room. They checked several storage areas. And then John Ramsey opened the wine cellar door, the room that Officer French had glanced into earlier that morning but not thoroughly searched. At 1:05 p.m., John Ramsey saw a white blanket on the floor. He immediately recognized it as a blanket from JonBenét's room. He rushed forward and saw his daughter's body wrapped in the blanket. He screamed. Fleet White, standing behind him, saw it too. John Ramsey, operating purely on instinct and horror, immediately pulled the duct tape from his daughter's mouth and picked up her body. He carried her upstairs, through the basement, up the stairs, and laid her on the floor in the hallway near the Christmas tree in the living room. Detective Arndt, hearing the commotion, saw John Ramsey emerge from the basement carrying JonBenét's body. The little girl's skin was blue-gray. She was clearly deceased and had been for some time. Arndt ordered everyone to step back. She covered JonBenét's body with a Colorado Avalanche sweatshirt that was nearby. She tried to regain control of what was now clearly a murder scene, but the damage was done. By moving the body, John Ramsey had destroyed critical evidence. The position of the body, the placement of items around it, the undisturbed nature of the crime scene, all of these elements that could have provided crucial information were now compromised. Investigators would never know exactly how JonBenét's body had been originally positioned. They would never know if items had been arranged around her in a specific way. The crime scene was contaminated beyond repair. This moment, more than any other, would fuel suspicion about John Ramsey for years to come. Critics argued that only a guilty person would move a body and destroy evidence. But defenders pointed out that John Ramsey was a father who had just found his daughter murdered. His instinct wasn't to preserve evidence. It was to get his little girl out of that cold, dark basement, to remove the duct tape from her mouth, to hold her, to try, however futile the attempt, to save her. The autopsy, performed on December 27th by Dr. John Meyer of the Boulder County Coroner's Office, revealed devastating details that painted a picture of JonBenét's final moments. She had died from asphyxiation due to strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. In simpler terms, she had been struck on the head with tremendous force, causing a skull fracture 8.5 inches long that extended from the top of her skull down toward the base. She had also been strangled with a cord garrote fashioned from white nylon cord and a broken piece of Patsy Ramsey's paintbrush. The medical examiner estimated the time of death between 10 p.m. on December 25th and 6 a.m. on December 26th, though he acknowledged this was a broad window. The condition of the body and the environmental factors made pinpointing an exact time of death extremely difficult. The sequence of injuries was crucial to understanding what happened. The head injury came first. The blow to JonBenét's skull was delivered with such force that it caused a depressed fracture, meaning the bone was driven inward. This injury would have rendered her unconscious immediately. However, and this is critically important, it did not kill her instantly. Based on evidence of brain swelling and other physiological responses, medical examiners estimated that JonBenet lived for 45 minutes to 2 hours after receiving the head injury. She was unconscious during this time, unable to cry out or resist. At some point during this window, while JonBenet was unconscious but still alive, the strangulation occurred. The garrote was a sophisticated device, not a simple cord tied around the neck. It consisted of white nylon cord looped around JonBenet's neck, with the ends tied to a broken piece of one of Patsy's paintbrushes, creating a handle that could be twisted to tighten the cord. This is a technique known in forensic circles and one that requires knowledge and deliberation to construct. There were other findings that added layers of horror to the case. Petechial hemorrhages in JonBenet's eyes indicated asphyxiation. There was bleeding in her vaginal area, and evidence of both acute injury and what some experts interpreted as signs of prior injury, though this remained highly disputed among the medical experts who reviewed the case. The possibility of sexual assault, either on the night of her death or previously, became another controversial aspect of the investigation. Undigested pineapple was found in JonBenét's stomach, indicating she had eaten it within approximately 2 hours of her death, probably closer to 1 hour. This seemingly minor detail would become crucial and highly controversial, because both John and Patsy Ramsey insisted they had not fed JonBenét pineapple that night. They said she fell asleep in the car on the way home from the party and was put directly to bed. Yet a bowl of pineapple with milk, with a spoon in it, was found on the kitchen table the morning of December 26th. The bowl had fingerprints on it. Testing revealed the fingerprints belonged to Patsy Ramsey and Burke Ramsey. Not John, not JonBenét, just Patsy and Burke. This created an immediate puzzle. If JonBenét ate pineapple within 2 hours of her death, and the bowl on the table contained pineapple, and that bowl had only Patsy and Burke's fingerprints, what did that mean? Did Patsy or Burke give JonBenét pineapple after they got home, contradicting their statements that she went straight to bed? Or did someone else feed her pineapple, wearing gloves or wiping the bowl after, and the existing fingerprints were from an earlier time? John Ramsey, in his latest interview, addressed this pineapple issue directly for perhaps the first time with real detail. He acknowledged that the pineapple has always bothered him because it doesn't fit with his memory of that night. But he also pointed out that in the chaos and exhaustion of Christmas night, it's possible that JonBenét woke up after being put to bed, came downstairs, and grabbed a piece of pineapple from the bowl. Or that Patsy, in the course of getting things ready for their early morning departure, prepared the bowl and gave JonBenét some without really registering it later. Memory, especially traumatic memory, is unreliable. But there's another possibility that fits the intruder theory. What if the intruder fed JonBenét the pineapple? What if he had taken her downstairs to the kitchen before going to the basement? This would explain why she ate it so close to her death, but why the Ramseys had no memory of feeding it to her. From the moment JonBenét's body was discovered, Boulder police focused their investigation on the family. This decision would define the case for decades and create a rift that has never fully healed. The prevailing theory among investigators was that someone in the house had killed JonBenét, either accidentally or intentionally, and then staged an elaborate kidnapping to cover it up. The ransom note, the placement of the body, the apparent lack of forced entry into the home, all pointed to what police called an inside job. The Boulder Police Department's theory went something like this. JonBenét was killed in the house, probably by accident during a moment of rage or frustration. Patsy, or possibly John, then panicked and decided to stage a kidnapping. They wrote the ransom note to misdirect police. They placed JonBenét's body in the basement. They created a scenario that would point to an outside intruder. Then they called 911, acting as though they had just discovered their daughter missing. This theory had several problems from the start, but investigators were convinced it was the only explanation that fit the facts as they understood them. The biggest problem was motive. What would cause a parent to kill their child on Christmas night? Various theories were proposed. Some suggested Patsy had a history of being a controlling, perfectionist mother who entered JonBenét in pageants to live vicariously through her. Maybe JonBenét had an accident, wet the bed, and Patsy struck her in anger. Others suggested something darker involving sexual abuse, though there was no evidence of this in the family's history. John and Patsy Ramsey were not officially named as suspects. Colorado law prevented police from publicly naming suspects without filing charges, but the Ramseys were placed under an umbrella of suspicion, a phrase that became infamous in the case. They were not free to grieve their daughter without the cloud of accusation hanging over them. The Ramseys hired attorneys almost immediately. Boulder attorney Brian Morgan was brought in on December 27th, the day after JonBenét's body was found. This decision was viewed by many as suspicious. Why would innocent parents need lawyers so quickly? But the Ramseys later explained that they had been advised by friends that Boulder police had already decided they were guilty and were building a case against them rather than looking for the real killer. They needed protection. The relationship between the Ramsey family and Boulder police deteriorated rapidly. Police wanted unfettered access to the Ramseys for interviews. They wanted to interview John, Patsy, and Burke separately and extensively. The Ramseys, on the advice of their attorneys, agreed to be interviewed but only under certain conditions and only after several weeks had passed. They wanted to bury their daughter first. They wanted time to process the trauma. They wanted attorneys present during questioning. This delay frustrated investigators who felt the family was being uncooperative. Standard procedure in any murder investigation is to interview family members immediately, while memories are fresh and before stories can be coordinated. The Ramseys' refusal to submit to immediate questioning was seen as evidence of guilt. From the Ramseys' perspective, they were grieving parents being treated like criminals by police who had already made up their minds. The battle lines were drawn, police and prosecutors on one side, the Ramsey family and their attorneys on the other, the media in the middle, feeding public opinion with a constant stream of speculation and leaked information. Public opinion turned brutal almost immediately. The media coverage of JonBenét's death became a feeding frenzy unlike anything seen before. Her pageant photos were shown constantly on television, creating an image that many found disturbing. Here was a 6-year-old girl dressed in elaborate costumes, wearing full makeup, her hair styled and sprayed, performing on stage in ways that seemed to sexualize a child. The pageant culture became a focal point of public discussion. Critics argued that child beauty pageants were inherently exploitative and potentially dangerous, exposing children to predators and unhealthy values. Defenders of pageants argued that they built confidence and provided opportunities for scholarships and modeling careers. But in the context of JonBenét's murder, the pageants took on a sinister quality. Had someone at these events become obsessed with her? Had the public nature of her participation made her a target? Questions arose about the Ramsey family's parenting. Why had they entered JonBenét in pageants at such a young age? Why allow her to wear makeup and perform in ways that seemed inappropriate for a child? Were they living vicariously through their daughter? Were they exposing her to danger? The accusations were relentless and often cruel. Conspiracy theories multiplied exponentially. Everyone had an opinion. Tabloid magazines published outrageous stories with headlines screaming about dark family secrets and cover-ups. Television talk shows debated the case endlessly, often with people who had no connection to the investigation presenting theories as facts. The case became less about finding a killer and more about sensational headlines and television ratings. The Ramsey family became prisoners in their own lives. They couldn't go out in public without being recognized and often confronted. They received death threats. Their home in Boulder became a tourist attraction with people driving by to gawk at the house where the murder happened. Eventually, they were forced to move away from Boulder entirely, relocating to Atlanta, where Patsy's family provided some measure of support and privacy. Through all of this, John and Patsy Ramsey maintained their innocence. They gave several interviews, including a famous appearance on CNN with Brian Cabell just 4 days after JonBenét's death. In that interview, they appeared composed but devastated. Patsy begged for anyone with information to come forward. John spoke about his daughter with obvious pain in his voice. But even this interview was criticized. Some viewers thought they didn't seem emotional enough. Others thought Patsy's appearance, her makeup and clothing, seemed too put together for a grieving mother. There was no way for them to win in the court of public opinion. What evidence did police actually have against the Ramsey family? This is a crucial question because after nearly 3 decades, we can look back and assess whether the suspicion was justified based on facts or whether it was driven by other factors. The ransom note remained the most significant piece of evidence suggesting family involvement. As discussed, the length and content of the note seemed strange. The specific amount demanded matched John's bonus. The note was written on paper from inside the home, using a pen from inside the home. The author had apparently practiced, written a draft, then written the final note, all while inside the Ramsey house. This suggested someone who had time and wasn't worried about being discovered. But here's what investigators couldn't adequately explain. If the family wrote the note to stage a kidnapping, why make it so long and elaborate? A simple note demanding money would have been more believable and taken far less time to write. Why include movie references and dramatic language? Why demand exactly $118,000 instead of a round number? Why write a practice note and then start over, creating additional evidence? And most importantly, why call 911 immediately after supposedly discovering the note before disposing of it or preparing the scene for police arrival? If you're staging a crime scene, you need time. You need to make sure everything looks right. You need to remove or hide evidence that might contradict your story. Calling police within minutes of supposedly discovering your child missing doesn't make strategic sense. It doesn't give you time to prepare. It invites immediate scrutiny. The evidence from the crime scene presented its own contradictions. There was an unidentified footprint found in the basement near JonBenét's body. It was a high-tech boot print, a specific brand and style of boot. Investigators checked every shoe owned by every member of the Ramsey family and everyone known to have been in the house. The print didn't match any of them. It remained unidentified. There was unidentified DNA found in JonBenét's underwear. This DNA came from blood mixed with JonBenét's blood in the crotch of her underwear. The DNA was from an unknown male. It was entered into the CODIS National DNA Database but never matched to anyone. More DNA testing in later years found additional DNA from the same unknown male under JonBenét's fingernails and on her long underwear. This DNA evidence strongly suggested that someone outside the family had been involved in her death. Yet the Boulder Police Department's theory required explaining this away. They suggested the DNA could have been from contamination at the crime scene, though experts found this explanation unsatisfactory, given that the DNA was found in multiple locations on JonBenét's body. They suggested it could have come from the manufacturing process of the underwear, though the underwear had been washed before JonBenet wore it, and experts said manufacturing DNA was unlikely to survive washing. They focused on the family despite evidence pointing elsewhere. The basement window became another point of major controversy. There was a window well on the side of the house leading to a small basement window. John Ramsey told police he had broken this window several months earlier when he'd locked himself out of the house and needed to get in. He had climbed through the window into the basement and then let himself into the rest of the house. He said he had been meaning to get the window repaired but hadn't gotten around to it. On the morning of December 26th, this window was found open. The window well outside showed some disturbance, though the ground was partially frozen, which made reading footprints difficult. There was a Samsonite suitcase positioned directly under the window on the basement side, as if someone had used it as a step to reach the window. There was a scuff mark on the wall below the window, consistent with someone's foot pushing off while climbing out. All of this suggested a possible entry or exit point for an intruder. Someone could have entered through the window, committed the crime, and exited the same way. Or someone could have entered through an unlocked door and exited through the window. The window provided a plausible route for an intruder. But there was a problem. There was an undisturbed spiderweb in the corner of the window well. Boulder police argued that no one could have gone through that window without disturbing the spiderweb. Therefore, the window couldn't have been used as an entry or exit point. Therefore, there was no intruder. Therefore, the family must be involved. John Ramsey later pointed out that the spiderweb was in the corner of the window well, not across the window opening itself. Someone climbing through the window could have avoided the web entirely. He also noted that spiders can rebuild webs very quickly, sometimes within hours. The web being there didn't definitively prove no one had used the window. This became emblematic of the entire investigation. Evidence that could point toward an intruder was dismissed or explained away. Evidence that could point toward the family was emphasized and built up. The investigation had a predetermined conclusion, and facts were made to fit that conclusion. For nearly 2 years, the Boulder Police Department worked the case primarily as a family-centered investigation. They brought in experts from around the country. They consulted with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. They reviewed thousands of pages of evidence. They interviewed hundreds of people. And they built what they believed was a strong circumstantial case against John and Patsy Ramsey. In 1998, the Boulder Police Department presented their findings to District Attorney Alex Hunter. They requested that a grand jury be convened to consider charges against the Ramseys. Hunter agreed, though he had significant doubts about whether the evidence would support a conviction. The grand jury convened in September 1998 and heard testimony for 13 months. Over 30 witnesses testified, including handwriting experts, forensic specialists, medical examiners, investigators, and people who knew the Ramsey family. The jurors reviewed over 30,000 pages of evidence, including police reports, autopsy findings, photos, and witness statements. They heard both sides of the case presented in detail, and in October 1999 they reached a decision. But District Attorney Alex Hunter held a press conference and announced that no charges would be filed. He stated that while the grand jury had concluded its work, there was insufficient evidence to warrant filing charges against anyone. He said that without enough evidence to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt at trial, pursuing charges would be inappropriate and potentially harmful to the Ramsey family. For 13 years, the public believed the grand jury had simply declined to indict. It seemed that even after hearing all the evidence, the jurors couldn't find enough to charge the Ramseys with a crime. This was seen as at least a partial vindication of the family. But in 2013, the Boulder Daily Camera newspaper sued under Colorado's open records law to have the grand jury documents unsealed. What those records revealed shocked the nation and reignited the controversy around the case. The grand jury had actually voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey. The indictment didn't charge them with murder directly. Instead, it charged them with child abuse resulting in death and being accessories to a crime. The wording of the indictment was careful and specific. It stated that John and Patsy Ramsey did unlawfully, knowingly, recklessly, and feloniously permit a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenét Ramsey. It also stated they did unlawfully, knowingly, and feloniously render assistance to a person with intent to hinder, delay, and prevent the discovery, detention, apprehension, prosecution, conviction, and punishment of such person for the commission of a crime. This language suggested the grand jury believed someone in the house killed JonBenét, and that John and Patsy helped cover it up, even if they didn't directly commit the murder themselves. Some interpreted this as the grand jury pointing toward Burke, who was 9 years old at the time and therefore couldn't be charged with a crime due to his age. Others saw it as the jury being unable to determine which parent was responsible, but believing both were involved in the cover-up. But District Attorney Alex Hunter had refused to sign the indictment. In Colorado, a grand jury's vote to indict is not final until the district attorney signs the document. Hunter looked at the evidence, consulted with his prosecutors, and made the decision that the case couldn't be won at trial. The DNA evidence created too much reasonable doubt. The lack of direct physical evidence connecting the Ramseys to the crime was problematic. The handwriting analysis was inconclusive. The case was entirely circumstantial. Hunter's decision was based on his assessment that the evidence wouldn't support a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. He knew that putting the Ramseys on trial and then having them acquitted would be worse than not charging them at all. An acquittal would prevent them from ever being charged again due to double jeopardy protections. At least by not filing charges, the case remained open. But this decision left everyone unsatisfied. The Ramseys remained under suspicion without ever having the chance to defend themselves in court. The public felt justice had been denied. The investigation remained in limbo. John Ramsey has lived with this burden for 28 years. Think about that for a moment. Nearly 3 decades of being suspected of murdering your own child. Nearly 3 decades of people crossing the street to avoid you, whispering when you walk into a room, sending hate mail and death threats. Nearly 3 decades of being unable to properly grieve your daughter because you're too busy defending yourself against accusations. John Ramsey has maintained his innocence consistently and absolutely from day one. He has never wavered in his story. He has submitted to police interviews, though these were often contentious. He has provided DNA samples for testing. He has taken lie detector tests, though police dismissed the results because the tests were arranged by his attorneys rather than by law enforcement. He has cooperated with every reasonable request while also protecting his family's rights. He watched his wife Patsy battle ovarian cancer while under the shadow of suspicion. Patsy was diagnosed in 1993, went into remission, but the cancer returned in 2002. She fought it while dealing with the ongoing investigation and public scrutiny. She died on June 24, 2006, at age 49, never seeing her name cleared, never seeing her daughter's killer brought to justice. One of Patsy's last wishes was that the investigation would continue and that whoever killed JonBenét would be found. John Ramsey also watched his son Burke, who was only 9 years old when his sister died, grow up under public suspicion. Burke was interviewed by police and by social workers in the days and weeks after JonBenét's death. He was cleared of involvement, but conspiracy theories persisted that perhaps he had accidentally killed his sister, and the parents had covered it up. In 2016, a CBS documentary titled The Case of JonBenét Ramsey strongly implied that Burke was responsible. Burke sued CBS for $750 million, and the case was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. And through it all, John Ramsey has insisted that an intruder killed his daughter. He has never stopped pushing for the investigation to continue. He has never stopped demanding that the evidence be properly tested with modern technology. He has never given up hope that justice will eventually be served. Now, at 80 years old, John Ramsey has given what may be his most revealing interview yet. He sat down with a journalist and spoke for hours about the case, about his daughter, about the investigation, and about what he believes really happened that Christmas night. He spoke with a clarity and directness that surprised even longtime followers of the case. He's not trying to convince anyone of anything anymore. He's not worried about public opinion. He simply wants the truth to come out before he dies. What did he finally admit? John Ramsey admitted that he made mistakes. He admitted that picking up JonBenét's body and carrying it upstairs was wrong from an investigative standpoint. He knows it destroyed the crime scene. He knows it made him look suspicious. But in that moment, he wasn't thinking like someone who understood crime scene protocols. He was thinking like a father who had just found his murdered child lying on a cold basement floor. His only thought was to get her out of that dark room, to remove the tape from her mouth, to hold her, to try somehow to save her even though he could see she was gone. He admitted that lawyering up immediately looked suspicious to many people. He understood why the public viewed it that way. But he and Patsy were being advised that Boulder police had already decided they were guilty and were building a case against them rather than looking for the real killer. They needed protection. They needed advocates who understood the legal system and could prevent them from being railroaded. He admitted that the relationship with Boulder police became toxic and adversarial, and that both sides could have handled things differently. In hindsight, perhaps they should have submitted to more immediate questioning, even with attorneys present. Perhaps police should have been more open to the intruder theory instead of focusing exclusively on the family. Perhaps everyone should have worked together instead of viewing each other as enemies. He admitted that the media circus turned the investigation into a spectacle and made it nearly impossible to focus on actual evidence. The constant tabloid headlines, the television talk shows, the books written by people with no connection to the case, all of it created an environment where truth became secondary to entertainment. He admitted that he and Patsy made mistakes in how they handled media appearances, sometimes seeming too composed, sometimes not composed enough, never able to grieve in a way that satisfied public expectations. He admitted that his family's wealth and privilege created a barrier of resentment that affected how they were viewed by the public and even by investigators. The Ramseys lived in a large house in an upscale neighborhood. John was a successful businessman. Patsy had been a beauty queen. JonBenét participated in pageants. They didn't fit the sympathetic victim profile that many people expected. Some investigators and members of the public seemed to believe that wealthy people who entered their daughters in pageants somehow deserved suspicion. But most importantly, most significantly, John Ramsey admitted something he has rarely discussed in detail before. He admitted that he believes he knows how the intruder entered and exited his home. He admitted that the basement window he had broken months earlier when he locked himself out was never properly secured. The latch was broken. The window could be opened from the outside. He had been meaning to fix it. He had been meaning to get it repaired, but he never got around to it. This is the admission that carries the most weight, because if John Ramsey is right, if an intruder used that unsecured window to enter the house, then John's failure to repair it created the opportunity that allowed his daughter's killer access. This is a burden he has carried for 28 years. The knowledge that if he had just fixed that window, if he had just gotten it repaired, his daughter might still be alive. In the interview, John Ramsey walked through his theory of what happened that night. He believes an intruder, likely someone who had been in the house before or who had cased it carefully, entered through the basement window. This person may have entered earlier in the evening, perhaps even while the family was at the Christmas party. He may have hidden in the house for hours, waiting for everyone to go to sleep. The intruder knew the layout of the house. He knew where JonBenét's room was. He knew his way around. This suggests someone who had been inside before. Remember, the Ramsey home had been part of a holiday home tour just weeks before Christmas. Hundreds of people had walked through the house, including the basement. Any one of them could have seen the layout, could have noted the basement window, could have planned to return. The Ramseys had also employed numerous contractors, housekeepers, and workers who had access to the home over the years. The house had undergone renovations. People had been in and out regularly. Background checks on all these individuals were conducted after the murder, but some were incomplete or inconclusive. Boulder police never fully pursued all of these potential suspects. John Ramsey believes the intruder went to JonBenét's room sometime after midnight. He either woke her or carried her while she was sleeping down to the basement. The intruder may have told JonBenét they were going to play a game or see a surprise. She may have gone willingly, not understanding the danger. At some point, the intruder gave JonBenét pineapple, perhaps from the bowl that had been left out on the kitchen table. Perhaps he took her through the kitchen on the way to the basement. This explains why pineapple was found in her stomach, but why the Ramseys had no memory of feeding it to her. In the basement, the assault occurred. At some point, whether JonBenét screamed or fought back, or simply because the intruder was a violent predator, he struck her on the head with tremendous force. Investigators believe the weapon may have been a flashlight that was found on the kitchen counter, a Maglite flashlight that belonged to the Ramseys. The size and weight of the flashlight matched the injury to JonBenét's skull. The blow fractured her skull and likely rendered her unconscious immediately, but she didn't die right away. The medical examiner estimated she lived for 45 minutes to 2 hours after the head injury, though she was unconscious and unresponsive during this time. At some point during this window, either because the intruder panicked or because he was following through on a premeditated plan, he strangled her with the garrote. He fashioned the device from cord and Patsy's paintbrush, creating a sophisticated strangulation implement. This required time and deliberation. It wasn't a crime of passion in the moment. It was calculated. After JonBenét was dead, the intruder faced a problem. He was in a house with a dead child. The family was upstairs sleeping. What should he do? He couldn't just leave her body there without raising immediate alarm. He needed time to get away. That's when he wrote the ransom note. Using materials from inside the house, sitting at the kitchen table or nearby, he crafted an elaborate fake kidnapping scenario. The note was meant to buy time. If everything had gone according to his plan, the Ramseys would have spent the entire day waiting for a ransom call that never came, believing their daughter had been kidnapped and was alive somewhere. This would have given him hours, maybe even a full day, to get far away from Boulder before the body was discovered. He never anticipated that John Ramsey would search the basement and find JonBenét's body within hours of the 911 call. He never anticipated that Detective Arndt would suggest the family search the house. His plan fell apart, but by then he was long gone. Does this theory hold up to scrutiny? Let's examine the evidence that supports it and the evidence that challenges it. The DNA evidence strongly supports the intruder theory. The unidentified male DNA found in JonBenét's underwear and under her fingernails has never been matched to anyone in the Ramsey family or their circle of friends and associates. This DNA was tested multiple times using increasingly sophisticated technology. In 2003, touch DNA testing revealed more genetic material from the same unknown male on JonBenét's long underwear. The consistency of this DNA across multiple locations on JonBenét's body makes contamination extremely unlikely. In 2008, based on this DNA evidence, District Attorney Mary Lacey issued a formal letter of apology to the Ramsey family. The letter stated that new DNA testing had cleared the family of suspicion and that the evidence pointed to an intruder being responsible for JonBenét's death. Lacey wrote that the Ramseys were entitled to the moral presumption of innocence and formally apologized for the years of suspicion they had endured. This was a significant moment. For the first time, a law enforcement official had publicly cleared the family and acknowledged that the investigation had been pointed in the wrong direction for years. But the damage was done. Public opinion had been cemented. Many people remained convinced of the family's guilt despite the DNA evidence. The boot print also supports the intruder theory. The high-tech boot print found near JonBenét's body was never matched to any footwear owned by the Ramseys or anyone known to have been in the basement legitimately. It represented an unknown person who had been in that basement room. Who did it belong to? Where is that person now? The stun gun theory, proposed by some investigators and experts, provides another piece of potential evidence. Dr. Michael Doberson, a forensic pathologist, examined photos of marks on JonBenét's body and concluded they were consistent with stun gun contact points. The spacing of the marks matched the electrode spacing on certain stun gun models. If true, this would strongly support the intruder theory, as it would represent a level of premeditation and tool usage that wouldn't fit with an accidental killing covered up by panicked parents. However, the stun gun theory has been disputed by other experts who believe the marks could have been caused by other objects or could be unrelated to the murder entirely. Like so much in this case, the evidence is ambiguous enough that experts can interpret it differently based on their pre-existing theories. The open basement window with the suitcase positioned underneath it suggests someone used it as an exit point. The scuff mark on the wall below the window is consistent with someone's foot pushing off while climbing out. The disturbed ground in the window well, though partially frozen and difficult to read clearly, shows signs of someone having been there recently. But the ransom note creates serious problems for the intruder theory. Why would an intruder spend so much time in the house writing a 2.5-page note? The risk of being discovered while sitting there writing would have been enormous. Every minute spent in that house was a minute the family could wake up, or Burke could come downstairs for a glass of water, or any number of things could go wrong. One explanation is that the note was written before the murder, not after. Perhaps the intruder entered the house earlier in the day while the family was at the Christmas party. He had hours to wander through the house, find the notepad and pen, and write the ransom note. He could have hidden in the house waiting for the family to return and go to sleep. This would explain why he had time to write such a lengthy note without worrying about being discovered. Another possibility is that the intruder was so comfortable in the house, so familiar with it, that he didn't feel rushed. He knew the family's sleeping habits. He knew they wouldn't wake up. He took his time because he felt confident he wouldn't be caught. The specific amount demanded in the ransom note, $118,000, remains one of the most intriguing details. This amount matched John Ramsey's recent bonus almost exactly. How would an intruder know this? One possibility is that the intruder had access to the Ramseys' financial information. Perhaps someone who had worked on their taxes or had access to pay stubs or financial documents. Another possibility is that someone close to the family had mentioned the bonus in conversation, and the intruder overheard or was told about it. John Ramsey addressed this in his latest interview. He noted that his bonus information had been shared with various people at Access Graphics, his company. He noted that he and Patsy had likely mentioned it to friends and family. It wasn't a carefully guarded secret. Someone who knew them even casually might have known about the bonus. There's also the question of motive. Why would an intruder kill JonBenét? The most disturbing possibility, and one that the evidence seems to support, is that the intruder was a predator who had become fixated on JonBenét. Perhaps he had seen her at pageants. Perhaps he had been part of the home tour and seen her room, her photos, her life. Perhaps he had developed an obsession. The assault in the basement, the evidence of possible sexual contact, all point toward a predatory motive. This was not a kidnapping for ransom that went wrong. This was a predator who targeted a specific child in a specific house and carried out a plan to assault her. The ransom note was staging, a desperate attempt to misdirect the investigation after the crime was committed. Who could this intruder have been? Over the years, several potential suspects have been investigated with varying degrees of thoroughness. One early suspect was a man named John Mark Carr. In 2006, Carr was arrested in Thailand after he confessed to killing JonBenét. He gave detailed statements about the crime and claimed he loved JonBenét and that her death was an accident. But DNA testing quickly ruled him out. His DNA did not match the unidentified DNA found at the crime scene. His confession was false, likely from someone with mental health issues seeking attention. Another suspect was Gary Oliva, a convicted pedophile who was in Boulder at the time of JonBenét's murder. Oliva had a history of crimes against children. He had been staying at a location less than 2 miles from the Ramsey home. After JonBenét's death, he was arrested for possession of child pornography, and photos of JonBenét were found in his belongings. He also allegedly confessed to a friend that he had killed JonBenét, saying, "I hurt a little girl." However, his DNA was tested and did not match the crime scene DNA. Without a DNA match, prosecutors couldn't build a case against him. There were also numerous other individuals investigated as potential suspects: contractors who had worked on the Ramsey home, pageant photographers who had taken pictures of JonBenét, neighbors and acquaintances who had been in the house. Every lead was followed, but none resulted in a match to the DNA evidence. This is where the case has remained stuck for years. There is DNA from an unknown male at the crime scene. This DNA has been entered into every database available. It has been compared against convicted offenders, arrestees, and voluntary submissions. and it has never matched anyone. This is where John Ramsey's latest push becomes so important. He is calling for the Boulder Police Department to submit the DNA evidence for genealogical DNA testing. This is the same technology that solved the Golden State Killer case after 4 decades. It's the same technology that has solved dozens of cold cases in recent years. Genealogical DNA testing works by uploading crime scene DNA to public genealogy databases like GEDmatch. The databases contain DNA from millions of people who have submitted samples to learn about their ancestry. When crime scene DNA is uploaded, the system searches for matches, not just to the specific individual, but to anyone who shares genetic markers that would indicate a family relationship. If the killer has any relatives, even distant cousins, who have submitted DNA to these databases, investigators can identify them. They can then build a family tree, working backward and forward through generations until they identify the individual whose DNA would match the crime scene sample. It's not guesswork, it's genetic genealogy, and it's proven to work. The Golden State Killer, Joseph DeAngelo, was caught this way in 2018 after evading capture for over 40 years. Investigators uploaded crime scene DNA to GEDmatch, found distant relatives, built a family tree, and eventually identified DeAngelo as the suspect. His DNA was then tested directly and matched perfectly. He was arrested, tried, and convicted. This same process could potentially identify JonBenét's killer. The DNA from her clothing and fingernails could be uploaded. Family connections could be identified. A family tree could be built. A suspect could be named. And after 28 years, there could finally be justice. But as of John Ramsey's latest interview, Boulder police have not committed to using this technology. They have made vague statements about using all available resources and exploring all avenues, but they have not publicly said they will pursue genealogical DNA testing. The frustration in John Ramsey's voice when discussing this is palpable. He is 80 years old. He knows he may not live many more years. He wants to see his daughter's killer identified before he dies. He wants his family's name finally and fully cleared. He wants justice for JonBenét. And the technology exists to potentially make all of that happen. But it requires the police department that investigated the case to take action. In the interview, John Ramsey addressed the resistance he's encountered from Boulder police regarding genealogical DNA testing. He believes the resistance stems partly from institutional pride and partly from liability concerns. If genealogical DNA identifies an intruder, it would prove that Boulder police spent nearly 3 decades investigating the wrong suspects. It would prove that the Ramsey family was wrongly accused and subjected to years of suspicion. It would potentially open the city to lawsuits and public criticism. But John Ramsey doesn't care about any of that. He's not interested in suing anyone or seeking revenge against the police department. He just wants answers. He just wants the case solved. He's willing to let bygones be bygones if it means finally finding who killed his daughter. The public perception of John Ramsey has been brutal and unforgiving. For 28 years, millions of people have believed he was involved in his daughter's death. He has been called a murderer, a monster, a child abuser, and worse. His face has been on tabloid covers with headlines declaring his guilt. He has received death threats, hate mail, and constant harassment. He has been unable to grieve his daughter properly because he's been too busy defending himself against accusations. Think about what that must be like. Imagine losing your child in the most horrible way possible, and then having the entire world accuse you of being responsible. Imagine going to the grocery store and having people whisper and point. Imagine trying to work and knowing your colleagues are wondering if you're a killer. Imagine trying to live any semblance of a normal life while under constant suspicion. And through it all, through nearly 3 decades of this nightmare, John Ramsey has maintained the same story. He has never changed his account of what happened that Christmas night. He has never slipped up or contradicted himself in any significant way. He has never been caught in a lie. An intruder killed JonBenét. The evidence supports it. The DNA proves it. The police focused on the wrong suspects and let the real killer escape. Is John Ramsey telling the truth? After nearly 3 decades of investigation, after thousands of hours of police work, after analysis by countless experts, after media coverage that dissected every aspect of the case, what do we actually know for certain? We know that unidentified male DNA was found on JonBenét's body in multiple locations. We know this DNA has never been matched to anyone despite being in the CODIS database for years. and being tested against hundreds of potential suspects. We know that in 2008, the district attorney formally apologized to the Ramsey family and cleared them of suspicion based on DNA evidence. We know that genealogical DNA testing, which has solved numerous cold cases in recent years, has not been utilized on this evidence despite the technology being readily available and proven effective. We know that Boulder police made significant mistakes in the initial investigation that compromised evidence and potentially allowed the real killer to escape. We know that the crime scene was not properly secured. We know that evidence was moved and contaminated. We know that the focus on the family from day one may have caused investigators to overlook leads pointing in other directions. We know that the relationship between the Ramsey family and Boulder police became so toxic that effective cooperation became impossible. Both sides bear responsibility for this breakdown, but the ultimate result was that the investigation suffered and the case went unsolved. We know that no physical evidence has ever directly connected John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey to JonBenét's murder. The handwriting analysis on the ransom note was inconclusive at best. The fibers and trace evidence found at the scene all had innocent explanations consistent with the family living in the house. The timeline of events presented by the family has never been definitively disproven. And we know that the injuries JonBenét sustained, an 8.5-inch skull fracture and strangulation with a sophisticated garrote, are not consistent with an accident covered up by panicked parents. These injuries indicate extreme violence, planning, and deliberation. They indicate someone capable of brutality against a child. They indicate a killer who is still out there. The tragedy of the JonBenét Ramsey case extends far beyond her death. It's a tragedy of investigative failure, where initial mistakes compounded over time until the case became unsolvable through traditional means. It's a tragedy of media exploitation, where a murdered child became tabloid fodder and her grieving family became entertainment. It's a tragedy of public rush to judgment, where millions of people decided the family was guilty based on nothing more than speculation and suspicion. It's a tragedy that a family was torn apart by accusation, when they should have been supported through unimaginable grief. It's a tragedy that evidence which could solve this case has been sitting in storage, unused, while the technology to analyze it has been available for years. It's a tragedy that institutional pride and liability concerns may be preventing justice from being served. And perhaps most of all, it's a tragedy that if the intruder theory is correct, if the DNA evidence is pointing us toward the real killer, then that person has been free for 28 years. Free to live their life without consequences. Free to potentially harm other children. Free because an investigation went wrong from day one and has never fully recovered. John Ramsey's latest interview represents perhaps his final push for justice. At 80 years old, he knows time is running out. He knows he may not live to see his daughter's killer identified, but he is determined to do everything in his power to make sure the investigation continues with the most modern tools available. He is determined to make sure JonBenét is not forgotten. He is determined to clear his family's name once and for all. In the interview, John Ramsey said something that should resonate with anyone who cares about justice. He said, "I don't care what people think about me anymore. I don't care if they believe me or not. I've spent 28 years defending myself, and I'm tired. All I care about now is finding who killed my daughter. That's all that matters. Justice for JonBenét. That's all I have left to give her. And I'm begging the Boulder Police Department to use the technology that exists. Test the DNA with genealogical methods. Find the match. Identify the killer. Do what should have been done years ago." What do you think happened to JonBenét Ramsey? Do you believe John Ramsey's account of an intruder entering through the basement window? Do you believe the DNA evidence exonerates the family? Do you think genealogical DNA testing could finally solve this case after 28 years? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This is a case that has divided public opinion for decades, and hearing different perspectives helps us all think more critically about the evidence. And if you believe this case deserves justice, if you believe modern technology should be used to identify JonBenét's killer, hit that like button. Help spread awareness of this case. Help put pressure on Boulder Police to finally use genealogical DNA testing. Your engagement with this video actually matters. It keeps this case in the public eye. It reminds law enforcement that people are still watching, still caring, still demanding answers. This case isn't just about one little girl, though JonBenét's life and death matter immensely. It's about how we investigate crimes in this country. It's about how we treat families in crisis. It's about how we let media sensationalism override factual reporting. It's about how we sometimes let institutional pride and fear of liability prevent us from doing the right thing. And it's about whether we're willing to use modern technology to solve old cases, or whether we're content to let them remain cold forever. The technology exists to potentially identify JonBenét Ramsey's killer. The DNA evidence exists in storage, preserved and available for testing. The genealogical databases are there, containing DNA from millions of people. The expertise exists among forensic genealogists who have solved dozens of similar cases. Everything needed to potentially solve this case is available right now. The only thing missing is the will to use it. John Ramsey has spent 28 years fighting for his family's name and for justice for his daughter. He has cooperated with every reasonable request. He has submitted to DNA testing, interviews, and public scrutiny. He has done everything asked of him and more. At some point, the burden shifts. At some point, law enforcement must step up and use every tool available to solve this case. At some point, we must acknowledge that the original investigation may have been fundamentally wrong about the family being involved and fundamentally right about an intruder being responsible. JonBenét Ramsey would be 34 years old today if she had lived. She would have graduated from high school and college. She might have pursued a career in entertainment or business or any number of fields. She might have gotten married and had children of her own. She might have reconciled her complicated feelings about the pageant world or embraced it fully. She might have done 1,000 different things with her life. But she was denied all of that on Christmas night in 1996 when someone entered her home and took her life. The least we can do, the absolute minimum we owe to her memory, is to make sure her killer is finally identified and held accountable. The least we can do is let her father see justice before he dies. The least we can do is use the technology that's available to potentially solve this case after 28 years of failure. Boulder Police Department, if you're listening, if anyone from your department ever sees this video, please consider what John Ramsey is asking. He's not asking for special treatment. He's not asking you to admit you were wrong, though you were. He's not asking for apologies or explanations. He's just asking you to test the DNA using genealogical methods. That's it. One test. One submission to the databases. One attempt to finally solve this case using modern science. What do you have to lose? If the genealogical testing doesn't work, you're no worse off than you are now. But if it does work, if it identifies a suspect, if it leads to an arrest and conviction, you'll have solved one of the most famous cold cases in American history. You'll have brought justice to a murdered child. You'll have vindicated an innocent family that spent decades under suspicion. You'll have done the right thing. Justice for JonBenét Ramsey is still possible, but only if we demand it. Only if we keep this case in the public consciousness. Only if we pressure law enforcement to use every available tool. Only if we refuse to let this case be forgotten or swept aside. If this investigation has moved you, if you want to see this case finally solved, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Vault. We cover cases that deserve to be remembered. Cases where justice has been delayed but not denied. Cases where modern technology and renewed investigation can still make a difference. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. And share this video with anyone who cares about justice, anyone who remembers JonBenét, anyone who believes that no case is ever truly cold, as long as people still care about finding the truth. Remember, these aren't just stories we tell for entertainment. These are real people, real lives, and real tragedies that deserve our respect, our attention, and our commitment to finding truth. JonBenét Ramsey was a real little girl with hopes and dreams and a future that was stolen from her. Her father is a real man who has suffered unimaginable loss and injustice. The killer is a real person who has evaded justice for 28 years. This is real, and it matters. Justice for JonBenét Ramsey is still possible. The question is whether we care enough to make it happen.